welcome back to the Sanditon Chronicles. Janice and I are here with our very final season 1 recap. And we're going to do episode 8. I don't know what we're going to do with ourselves after this. We'll have to brainstorm.
Yes. I want to do one on parallels and ironies.
Yeah,
because there's a lot in this show.
Yeah, a lot. And I think one thing that we see, and we'll talk about that as we go through the recap, but one thing we see about that is in this episode 8, they actually almost shot it that way, where it's not necessarily a parallel, but in the end, when they're going between Babington and Sidney, and then to Esther and Lady Denham, and then back to Babington and Sidney, and then to Charlotte and Mary. So it's almost like they went back and forth between these scenes, but it made it seem like the same conversation. And it was just kind of, the filmography in this episode was kind of neat to the way they tied everything in like that.
Yeah. And some of my favorite music is in this episode.
Oh my gosh. I rewatched it again and probably 2 hours ago now, but that final music as it builds, it's masterful in the end of the scene. But I think that's actually one of the reasons why, I mean, that's not obviously not the only reason. I think the music in the end of this episode is one of the reasons why we were so hopeful. Because if you listen to the tone of that music as it builds, it's almost like, okay, there's going to be a fight coming. There's going to be a change. This is going to be good. And then you just feel that swell of hope because the music leads you there. So,
yeah. And I think they were hopeful up until circumstances changed everything.
What is the name? Remind me the name of the composer again.
Oh, shoot. If you hadn't asked me that, I could have told you.
She's not, like, I listened to the soundtrack, the score for this a lot.
Yes,
she's one of my favorites now.
Yeah. Ruth Barrett.
Yes, Ruth Barrett. That's what it is. I knew it. And then Dom, right? He had a hand in some of this. Dominic. Really well done throughout the whole thing.
There was a picture on Twitter today of one of the musicians that's on the second series, his instruments at least.
Mm-hmm.
So, which was cool. There was a harp and a violin. Okay. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. So when we first open up this episode, speaking of the music in the very beginning of this episode is it's really, I can't even describe it. Like, it's very forceful, but it's almost like this soft, sweet thing. And it's
very appropriate for her mood. And as she walks along the beach there in Sanditon, which is, of course, very appropriate as well.
And I think I don't think that I've enjoyed the music in a show in a long time as much as I enjoy it here, because the music, we all know nonverbal is my sweet spot, and this music really leads you really, really well into the direction that you're supposed to be going with your feelings. And it's just really smartly done. I love it.
I rewatched a version that was put out by PBS, one of their rebroadcasts that I had recorded, but I hadn't watched it. And one of the things they did is they followed up the episode with that write-up they did when it first came out, called Unwritten. It's on YouTube, where there's little interviews with different members of the cast. And, that's the one where Chris Marshall says that the thing he loves about this show is how well the actors inhabit the characters.
Oh, absolutely. You and I have talked about that from the jump. That's why recasting could never happen in the show, because these actors have done such a phenomenal job, not just acting out the scenes, but becoming that person.
Yes.
Like, if I saw Chris Marshall on the street, I'd be like, "Hey, Tom." I don't think I'd say Chris. I think I'd say, "Hi, Tom."
I think you might be right. It's interesting, we suddenly talked about the fact that I had never come up with the title for episode 6. So I have a title for it.
Good. What is it? Remind us.
It's Rescue and Revelations.
That's accurate.
Right? And then for today's episode 8, it's Hopes and Heartbreaks.
Oh man. And that's another thing this episode does, is every hope that you have, it may not be set in the same situation, but every hope is accompanied by a heartbreak. Like, almost immediately felt the way it's filmed. Even it's not just that Charlotte and Sidney start and they also end this episode, but it's like Charlotte and Sidney start, and then the next scene is Georgiana looking at the picture of Otis, and then something else happens that's good, and then something happens that's bad. So it's like really pulling you back and forth, but it's it's almost like making you feel deeper about the show and these people.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So let's dig into the meat of this episode. So I love in the beginning, the first thing that we really see, obviously Charlotte walking across the beach, but the first scene that we really see with multiple people is the look between Charlotte and Sidney. And I love his little half smirk while he just stares at her. And what I wrote is that Tom is oblivious, but Sidney is so hopeful in that moment.
Right.
So it's appropriate that's what we start with.
Tom doesn't really know what's happened between them. And he's more concerned about, that the houses are almost done, and, his statement is it's really coming true.
Yeah.
I hope.
And even when Sidney doesn't follow him, Tom's just like, okay, you're staring at something. I'm not even going to look in the direction you're staring. I'm just going to go off on my own way.
Yeah.
And then we see, so that's another way we start with the hope. And then the next scene is Georgiana, and Charlotte's confessing to Georgiana about this hope. And I just, what has Sidney done to warn her comment? You cannot trust a word he says.
I know.
Well,
it's, you know what I think? I think that she's projecting.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You can't trust what she says.
Because she couldn't trust Otis and she loved Otis.
And she lies repeatedly during the series.
She does, yeah, that's true.
So, yeah.
And so Georgiana is trying to talk her out of being in love with him. You can't be in love with him. You can't trust him. Men like that, it's a really, really sad, and because we don't see a resolution on how she feels about Sidney at the end. We see that this is her view, and this remains her view at the end of season 1, that he is untrustworthy piece of crap, basically.
Right.
And I think she feels that way because Otis ended up being that way.
No, I think you're right that Otis betrayed her, and I mean, not intentionally, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to do it, but he did it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just so sad. So I am really hopeful that she will have matured when we get to the next series.
Me too. And I think they will, because Crystal Clark is such a good actress. And I think, again, she's inhabited Georgiana so well. I think that any good character has to experience growth in one direction or another. And I think because she's not a villain, there's no way they're going to make her grow in the wrong direction. She's not going to become more spoiled and more of a brat. I think that they need to move her forward in order to make this story flow. The
hints they've given indicate that she's going to be up to some mischief, though.
Oh, I don't think that will ever leave her. I think that's just part of her nature. And I kind of like the mischievous side of her. Mm-hmm. I just don't like the outright judgmental rude that she comes out with to people who don't deserve it, because Otis never gets that from her. She pines from the whole episode. The people who have wronged her don't really get that from her, but the people who are there, and that's indicative of her trauma, I suppose, that the people who are actually there standing with her are the ones that she's battling against. I mean, there's that saying of you're usually meaner to the ones who love you unconditionally because they'll never leave you. Mm-hmm. So it would be nice to see her understand that and grow out of that, but still keep her mischievous side, because you want her to be fun to watch still.
Yeah. I mean, because it's fun. She has many fun characteristics, but just her interaction. Well, Sidney won't be around to beat up on.
It's true, but Arthur will be around. I hope we see more of the Georgiana Arthur partnership, because I love those two as friends. I think that plays out so well.
And the book talks about more things than the series showed. So
I need to start reading that book. I carry it with me from room to room, thinking I'll read it, and then I don't read it.
You're too busy doing podcasts.
I know. That's my problem. So we see that. Did you want to say anything else about that room scene with her and Georgiana, with Charlotte and Georgiana?
It was just kind of sweet. They did it the way they did it with her putting earrings on her, and and I love Charlotte's expression, like you can tell that she's in love.
Yeah. And it's nice to see George, because I think it's another indication of where she's going to go in seasons 2 and 3, because this is the first time we really see her caring for someone else. Right. So she's actually holding up the earrings to Charlotte, making sure Charlotte has something nice and making sure it fits right. And the interesting parallel there is that later on the episode, when the Beaufort sisters come in, like, Georgiana, what should I wear? I don't know, that one. So it's I think that it's nice to see her comforting Charlotte and caring for her in that way. And then later on in the episode, when it's someone unfamiliar to her, she is almost like defensive about it. Like, no, I'm not going to do this for you. But then she does it anyway. So I think that's,
Or
we're going to see that
dismissive.
part. Yeah.
She's kind of dismissive about those girls anyway. So
This is the first episode that she's not, I don't find her dismissive towards them. I think she's annoyed by them, but I think it's almost like she's annoyed because she's noticing.
it's okay.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that she's not going to be screaming over when I talk. But I think this is like the first episode that she really notices them, because she never really has before. She's never acknowledged them. Do we ever even see a conversation or words exchanged between her and them throughout the series? I can't recall.
Well, in the scene where Sidney is there for the cricket match, and she has been with the Beaufort sisters, and they come into the room all together. And so she obviously spent time with them. I mean, she's always entering rooms with them, you know.
But I wonder if that's because that's where Mrs. Griffiths placed them, or because Georgiana actually was conversing with them and being a part of a relationship with them. I would imagine her just being in a room silent with them rather than speaking to them.
Oh, I don't feel that way.
Really?
I think she interacted with them. I just think she sort of thought of them as little sisters that were silly.
Yeah, I never really thought that way. I always thought the opposite, that she basically pretended they
had
didn't
nothing
exist.
to do. Well, she doesn't really want to have anything to do with them around other people.
Doesn't she call them the idiot Beaufort sisters at one point?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you know that she's hearing the things that they say.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then we move from that hope to that sort of heartbreak where you can't trust him, to James's hope, where he gets the letter from that man in London. Is it an architect in London that sent him this letter? That's what it is, right?
Yes,
okay.
Because he was given an offer to do an apprenticeship.
Yes. And he's so cute when he's so happy. He's just so excited he got this. And Fred, I want Fred to be my friend. He's such a good friend. He did nothing but encourage him and lead him on and say, you know what, this is good for you. Even though you have to tell your dad it's going to be fine, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
I love the scenes with those
good
two.
Friend. I agree.
Yeah. And from there we move into Lady Denham and Esther playing cards. And I think that there is something so hilarious, and it's almost like delightfully transparent and normal. It's so weird in that way. That's why it's so funny just to see them playing a game of cards together, just the two of them. I mean,
I think they're playing cribbage. It sounded like cribbage.
My mom plays a game. I don't know how to play it, and the words they were saying, I was like, I don't know what that means. What you're saying right there, I don't get it.
Yeah, it's cribbage, or a sort of a similar game anyway.
Okay. And there's something so sweet about those two doing it. And it's almost like Lady Denham. I mean, even with Clara was there, but Clara was always like this thing that she would swat away until she wanted to talk about how good she was to Clara. But with Esther, it's almost like Lady Denham is working to pull her out.
Yes, and I think Lady Denham really sort of understands what she's been going through.
Yeah. She sees a lot of herself in Esther.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, there's neither one of them have any artifice whatsoever in their characters.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And then Lord Babington arrives. And I love the way he says he's there to tempt Esther on a carriage ride.
Yeah.
And Esther's not very tempted. I said, to her chagrin, at least that's what she puts on, that she doesn't want to go, doesn't look at him. But
you can watch her facial expression change and see that she is intrigued by it. But I think the reigning theme for Esther in this episode is she does not view that she's worthy of him. And I think we discussed it a little bit in episode 7 when she told him no. She doesn't think that she's worthy of him anymore. And that's kind of why she was so okay with letting him loose. Like, I'm damaged goods. I'm of use to nobody. You will not be happy with me.
Right. Yeah.
But I love what Lady Denham said. She said she needs a good shaking about.
Tossing about or jollying about.
She said shaking about. She needs a good shaking about. I wrote down that she said it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, that was great. And she was right. She needed to be shaken out of her doldrums.
And at the end, when she, right before she gets up to go, like her facial expression has changed from, ah, crap, to almost like this timid hope. So we have, there's that hope theme again. And this episode is so wrought with the facial expressions of both hope and heartbreak. And that's a perfect title for this episode, because it's so evident on their face when they're feeling both of these things. And Esther herself in this episode swings between both of those.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And I just love, how she's just determined to not show him that she's going to enjoy this. And he just doesn't believe her. I mean, it's a fun episode. And I'm not gonna, no, I'm wrong about that. I was thinking something anyway. And of course, that song that they play while she's Esther takes the reins, that is one of my favorite songs. It's so really good. It's really good. Yeah.
And the tone of it again is incredibly hopeful.
Yes.
There's such a good undertone to that song that while you're listening to it, you can't help the smile that comes on your face.
And cheerful,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the reasons I relate to Esther so well is I think that she's got this personality that pokes fun at people. And that's just like when I always tell this to people, when I first met my husband's brother, he didn't talk. Like he barely spoke anything. He would, when we have dinner together as a family, we'd go to hit my husband's parents' house and he would just stare down on his plate and just eat without saying anything. And the only way I got him to talk was to make fun of him. That's what I did. That's still a relationship almost 20 years later, as I just make fun of him all the time. And then he'll smile and he'll talk back.
Yeah, then he rises to the occasion.
Exactly. And I think I think that's part of Esther's character, is she just has this fun, mischievous side that has never been allowed to be let out under Edward. But she's comfortable letting out in front of Babington. I think there's part of her that's like, well, if I do this and I can keep my walls up, and if he rejects me anyway, then I'm fine. But I can also do this and see, this is fun for me. And it's fun for Babington. I love how much pleasure he takes in this aspect of her personality, because he loves it. He loves it.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. He does. Yeah. And so do you want to talk some more about what happens with them, or do you want to go to the scene with Tom being chased by the children?
We can move into that one. Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll come back to Esther and Lady
several times.
Denham, but yeah, so I love that scene. It's so nice and cheerful compared to what we've been seeing out of Tom and Mary. And the children are chasing him and land on him, and then he's like, rescue me.
Yeah.
And Mary comes and gets them to go to the schoolroom.
I love, you have to imagine that this is the kind of father and husband he was before all the worries with Sanditon came on him. Yeah. So it's nice to see, even when Mary comes in the room and she's got this expression on her face of it's like relief mixed with joy that's on her face when she comes into the room. And it's like, oh, there he is. He's back. And he's clearly no longer used to it. So he's winded when he falls down, and he's winded when he gets up. And you have to imagine, like, you're going to have to work your way back into this town. You can't just go right back to where you were. You got to stretch those muscles a little bit. And I think that's why it always makes me laugh, that scene, because when he's like, oh, Mary, please.
Yes. Yeah.
Can't take it.
And what's great about that is then Tom walks into the office where Charlotte's working, and Tom's so cheerful and happy and, towards her and everything. And then Sidney arrives and, brings the contracts as what he says, and then goes in and offers to pick up something in town for Charlotte.
I love the scene. I don't have a lot of notes in the scene because I just like to watch it.
Yeah, so I know.
I had to pause it and then write what I knew about the scene. And then I was like, okay, I'm just going to enjoy the scene now.
Well, and then of course she says, well, I have a dress fitting. Could I walk with you? Yeah. And what a great excuse.
Yeah. And what I love about that dialogue there and how they wrote it is that well, first of all, I mean, obviously Sidney found an excuse to stop by because he could have brought those by at any time. But being a gentleman, being polite, he asks her for the bare minimum. Can I go pick something up for you in town? And he leaves it up to her to choose if she wants more with him. And I thought that was so sweet and such a really smart way to play that out and to demonstrate that this is what Sidney's doing is, I know I'm going to let you know that I'm welcome. I want more, but I'm only going to ask you to give the bare minimum. And if you want to give more, then that's going to be your choice. And so then she offers well, I can go with you.
Yes.
Fitting, I'll go with you.
Yeah, it's good. He's kind of they're feeling each other out about, okay, after the conversation last night, where are we?
Yeah. And Mary in the background, like she almost looked like she had a hand in him appearing there with those contracts, because she looked like she knew he was going to be there. And right after Tom leaves, she immediately looked to Charlotte and was just waiting. I know it's coming. So it almost looked like she had a hand in it. And I just love the expression on Sidney's face when he lays hands on Charlotte for the first time. It's just, I wrote his look to her with a little heart, because it's so sweet. And it's not a hungry look. It's nothing physical. It's just, he just feels relief to be seeing her and be in her presence. And how sweet is that? Yeah.
I agree. So they and I love the way that Mary shepherds them out,
Well, go on, you two.
Off you go.
I love Mary, which almost makes the end. And I asked I asked Kate Ashfield about that too, because from that scene to the end, she's like, "Yeah, you're engaged to Eliza." You know that she knew. So, and if you guys have not watched that interview that we did with Kate, that I did with Kate Ashfield, go watch it on our channel, because we actually talk about this episode quite a bit.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. So now we're back to Sanditon House and Lady D and Esther. So Esther walks back in, and Lady D's like, she can tell she had a good time.
Yeah, her cheeks are still rosy.
Yeah, and she's kind of giving her a hard time about it. And Esther starts pouring tea, which is very appropriate.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how Lady D recounts her history with her first love.
Well, I think going back even a few sentences earlier, when Esther says he is a fool, I think that when Lady Denham says he is not a fool, because Lady Denham didn't really put much stock in it other than his money before. But I think that there's a deeper meaning to that, other than, no, he's not a fool, he's a lord. I think he's pursuing you, so he's clearly not a fool if he's pursuing. And I think that Lady Denham, because her and Esther are so similar, I think she was reading that in Esther, that's what Esther views of herself. And I think Lady Denham was trying to say, listen, he's not a fool because he's going for you. And Esther kind of confirms it later when she says, and this breaks my heart every time. And again, Charlotte Spencer, great acting, because her facial expression clearly shows how she feels about herself when she says, he is a fool if he cannot see I am not worth having. And that breaks my heart a little every time I hear her say that line.
And he is a fool if he thinks I can ever love him as he loves me.
Yeah.
And that's where Lady D comes in and says it is infinitely better to be loved than to love, especially in a marriage, which is an interesting statement. And one of the things she says that what wasn't in the conversation and the dialogue that was in the book was interesting. It said, after all, to love someone is to be held captive. And
oh, wow. That has a different spin to it.
And then when she's talking about, yes, it's better to be loved and then to love, she also says in the book, the point is it's much better to be the one who holds the reins, which is an interesting statement.
And of course, in that story she tells, she obviously was, when you love someone, you give of yourself to them. And I love how that it's not explicitly said, but it's implied. That's tied in even later in the episode when Charlotte and Sidney are on the balcony. But I think her point there too is that you give all of yourself to this person when you love them. If they choose to leave you, you can do nothing. And then you're just left with this mess. And if someone loves you, they're going to care for you. They're going to be there for you. And again, I didn't read the book, so I didn't have that context that the book gives it. But from what I took as a viewer just in the show is that when you love someone, instead of them loving you, then that means that the captive thing works, but you have to be the one putting everything in there. And then when they don't return it and they continue to not return it, then you continue to cause yourself pain and turmoil. And when they eventually leave you, as they do in these young romances, then you're going to be broken and destitute.
Well, and you get some sympathy for Lady D when you understand about how she was really in love with this man, or at least extremely infatuated. And how she would wait on every word, every look from him, like one of his
like
dogs.
a dog.
Yeah. And, so you can tell she knows what it is to be heartbroken.
Yeah.
And it's the one thing is, if you're not the one who's the most in love, then you have more control. As she said, you're the one who holds the reins.
Yeah.
So it's not a bad thing from her viewpoint, but it is very different from what Charlotte said at the luncheon about when there's a difference in the affection, it could be a kind of slavery.
Yeah. And that's true too. Absolutely. And I love that Lady Denham, we're seeing this whole new side since Esther came out. And I think that Lady Denham has understood Esther in such a new way. And I don't think it's that she's seeing something different in Esther, because I think Esther is the same as she ever has been. But I think that separating her from Edward, she was able to see, oh, she isn't just a replica of Edward. She is like,
more than that, I think Esther is coming to understand just how much Lady Denham understood about Edward and how he was affecting Esther.
Well, I don't think Lady Denham sees that until near the end of episode 8 of the ball. I don't think she understood the hold that he had over her quite yet. I think she understood that there was something more going on, but I don't think she got it.
I think she highly suspected it.
Yeah. I took a note of that in the ball scene when she's approaching, and so we'll talk about that when that comes up later on. But there's a reason I think that way, and it has to do with the nonverbal thing that Lady Denham does.
That's quite the look.
Everything is nonverbal for me. That makes sense.
Which is why they ran those interviews of the one that's called Unwritten, because it's about not what's written.
Yeah, I did remember seeing that. I binge watched all those episodes several times when I was so bummed at the end of this episode. I actually remember this episode ended and I was texting my friend like, no, that's not the end. There's another one coming, right? And I was like almost a panic that was the last one we were getting. And so I had to stay in that world. So I binge watched all the episodes or all the things PBS had, all the extra videos over and over and over again, trying to continue to stay there.
When my cousin was here and I played the whole series for her, I had warned her and she was still just as devastated.
Because you don't think, when you sit down and watch a show, it's going to be good or it's going to be bad. You kind of have an inkling, but you don't think that you are going to get that connected to a character in that way. In those 8 episodes.
Yep. Nuts. Very definitely.
So we go from that to the cliff walk, which is another scene that I don't have a lot of notes on because I just wanted to watch it. I love, there are these moments when Sidney's walking behind her and you can see his hand go up almost like he wants to put it around her for a minute, and then he puts it down, and it's the one that's behind her back that I always watch. I'm always gravitating towards watching that arm and that hand, because there's a couple times when his hand was flat out like he was going to touch the small of her back, and then he pulled it back, and there's another
and I think they were climbing a hill, and part of that was sort of protective.
Yeah, but it was also, he wanted to have that kind of touch with her. He wanted to have that kind of intimacy with her because he already felt it mentally, that I think he just wanted to solidify. And again, it wasn't like a sexual thing at all. I think he just wanted that closeness with her, and he wanted to, as he says later on, he wanted to care for her.
Right. Yeah.
And it was just, that's so sweet, I think, the way that he did that.
And their small talk is quite fun.
I love it. Yeah. I love watching him fumble over those questions. It just, because I know what's coming now, it's almost like I giggle every time I watch it.
Well, it's really the only conversation we've seen between them that I would classify as small talk.
Yeah, because they've never had small. It's always been like deep things.
Yeah.
He's never had to work to talk with her.
Right. Yeah. And and he's asking if she's looking forward to the ball, and she asks him the same thing, and of course she's like, I love to dance, and so of course she is, and it's good weather, but that doesn't really matter, and as it's an indoor event. And, and then they talk about, she's had a letter from her sister because he asked after her family. And that's the first time we've ever had him ask after her family.
Yeah.
And then he says, well, we know nothing happens in Willingdon. So
he says, we both know nothing happens in Willingdon.
Yeah. And then she suddenly says, we seem not to be walking into town.
I think
such a funny statement.
The way I kind of read that, because every time I read it, every time I watch it, I get a little more from it. And it's like the Bible. You can read the same verse 10 times and get 10 different interpretations. And so when I'm watching this, I'm pulling something different every time. And that time is the first time I actually had the thought of, I wonder if she is so sick of this small talk that she just wants to get back to their normal deep stuff, that she just, all right, we're going to end this. We're going to either go back into town and do this, or we're going to have a normal conversation and be like we normally are. Because right after he says that, he's like, oh, what a fool I am. She says, no, I much prefer this. I much prefer being alone on the cliff
you may be right. She's like that. Now they've reached the top of the hill. So now is the time to really talk, or really get down to what it is we're doing here. Yeah.
And I think that they obviously both have and feel that connection towards each other. And I think that he was obviously struggling with having the small talk and keeping it going. And it was cute and adorable, but it wasn't sustainable. So something had to break there. And I think that was just kind of, I think he was anxious to get on with it. And she was the one who made the very kind decision to do it humbly and take the pressure off him, because she could obviously tell he's feeling some kind of nervousness and some kind of pressure. I mean, anyone, a blind man could see that.
And she was too.
Yeah. And so I think she was just like, all right, let's just get into it. Let's either not have a conversation at all and end this nonsense, or let's be normal with each other and continue that connection that we have.
And where are we going with this? You know, why are we up here? And and his first words about, well, wanting to be alone, have a moment to alone together. And then his words about that he his head was full of the conversation from the night before. And she has had that happening, because that's what she told Georgiana, that she was that's all she could think about.
And she says, nor could I, or so is mine, she says.
Me anyway, they're on the same page.
Which is not shocking.
No, not at all. And he says, I woke up with full of the conversation, and we know she didn't sleep much because of the conversation. So it's interesting.
And I think, I know that he says Charlotte and she says yes, but the kiss thing is, again, it was him asking for permission and letting her be the one to make that choice, because he gave her ample time to say, when he said Charlotte, she could have said nothing, or she could have said no, because it was, she's naive, but she could have stopped whatever was about to happen, but she wanted that connection. She moved her head a little bit closer to him. So in every step of this, Sidney's love for her is so great that he is just willing to just be there with her if she wants nothing more, but still allowing her to make the choice if she wants more or not. And so
she certainly didn't turn away.
No, she leaned into it before it happened, before she, actually, as she said yes, she moved her head up a little bit. And then he stared at her for a few minutes, again, giving her more time to say no, or giving her the choice of going deeper with him. And I love that you see kisses in movies now and Hollywood now, and it's very involved, and there's way more pieces you want to see flowing in there than you want to. But this was almost like it was a chaste kiss. It wasn't graphic. It wasn't, it was just, because it was the actors themselves were playing this from a place of absolute devotion rather than I want so much more from you. It was just this relief to have that connection get even deeper. It was a devotional kiss, a chaste devotional kiss. And I love that.
Right. And so did you ever hear the interview when they asked Rose about this scene, filming this scene?
Maybe. I don't remember.
She said, well, she had terrible hay fever.
Oh, really?
And she had terrible hay fever, and she just appreciated how kind he was about it, as they're having to reshoot the scene because she kept sneezing.
Oh no.
Can you imagine?
No.
Especially that scene, you know.
And it wasn't like it was a calm day. Like it was a windy day, so things were everywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
And I love too that like when they first kiss, again, this is a credit to Theo James's skill, but he has an expression on his face even while he's kissing her. And I think it's so, like it was in his eyebrows and his forehead where he almost looks like he's concentrating very hard. And I thought that was another indication of just like a release of having this connection, but also still letting her choose how far she wanted to go with it. And so he's controlling himself and letting her kind of lead, being the gentleman, because he has more experience. He knows what he wants. But I think he understands that Charlotte probably doesn't know fully what she wants. And he's allowing her to lead that moment. And what a sense of love and devotion Sidney has for her.
Yes. And that's what Theo James brings out. He, you know, he portrays that so beautifully.
Yes.
And, you know, it's his whole face and his eyes that are so amazing with the way he acts. I really am looking forward to some more of his work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And all the things I've seen him in, it's like, and even the tone of his voice, he will alter to demonstrate an emotion that he's feeling.
Right.
There's one movie I was watching him in where he was concerned for the person he was with, and his voice like dropped 6 octaves. It's probably an exaggeration, but these are all tools that he has in his arsenal that he regularly uses to help us really fully understand not just what's happening, but what the character is thinking. And I think that is such an asset to any show, to actually get in the mind of a character just because of what the actor is doing non-verbally. And he's really, really good at that. I think I love his work. I'll keep watching this stuff.
And Charlotte, Rose Williams, she is really emotes really well too.
She's another one who uses the tone of her voice to do that really well.
Yeah.
And you can see that in when she said yes there, it was a yes, but it was almost like a whisper, but like trying to be strong. And there was the fluttering of her eyelid. Like she just used so much on her face to convey in that moment. Yes. It was really nice.
Yeah.
And I like that we zoom out from that and then we see all the preparations. And again, this is a filming aspect of this episode that I really, really like. Did Charles direct this one? This is Charles, right? Or was this Chris?
Yes,
Lisa?
Charles.
Okay. I think he did an excellent job with that. I think it was really interesting to watch. I think it helped with the flow of it because like we talked about, I think I was not recording when we talked about it, but it felt so fast, but not in a bad way. It just felt like, oh no, the episode's over already. And I think that was a tribute to how he filmed it. Like you see Georgiana prepping, and then you see Charlotte and Mary, and then you see Esther, and then you see Babington and Sidney, and then you go the back and forth. So it's you hear the music that's behind it, and you see what they're doing in preparation for this ball. You see Georgiana looking at this picture of Otis being sad and forlorn.
And even more, the filming is obviously very important, but what you're talking about is really the film editing.
Yeah.
That's, you have to have the raw footage, but it's how you put it together.
Well, yeah.
That puts it, so, and I don't remember who the film editor was on this episode, but they were, I'm sure it was hand in hand with the director. I'm sure they were sitting there together going through it about what they wanted, but it's so well put together.
Yeah, it would have been the producer and the director together. And well, they have a team of people, but it would have the producer and the director.
The film editor, though, specifically.
Yeah, those three would work together because the producer is the one who produces the work.
No, but the producer and the editor are two different things.
No, I know they are. I'm saying three of them would have worked together.
Yeah.
On that. And I think there's actually more people than just those three who work on the editing process of getting it out. But I just think it was really, really smartly done.
Yes. And definitely.
The music again was genius to put behind there because it's amping you up. There's this anticipation to the music that's being played in the background. And again, there's that joy that they have filtering through the episode that's bringing you hopeful for what this night is going to bring, because there's about to be a lot of stuff happening all at one time.
Yeah.
Coming up. So yes. You see Georgiana looking at this picture of Otis, rubbing his picture, and then talking to the Beaufort sisters about the necklace. And then it shoots to Charlotte coming in the room with Mary. And then it goes to Esther appearing with her dress. And then it goes to Babington and Sidney showing up at the ball. And I like this part when they first show up because there's no talking right now. but you see Sidney kind of pop his head around and like look around. And there's no one else there really. So he has to know Charlotte's not there, but he's still like, have you ever anticipated something so much and you know it's not time for it to happen yet, but you're still looking for it?
Oh yeah.
And that's what he's doing.
Like children looking out the window for somebody they know
exactly.
is coming.
Yeah. And I loved how that was put together, how that was placed together.
And I love the scene. Well, Lady D says he'll be glad that you went to the trouble, or what exactly she says, but anyway. And yes. And then when Mary tells Charlotte about Tom's proposal, that's another thing that sets you up.
Yep. All these, and that was one where they went from Babington and Sidney to Esther and Lady Denham, and I love this scene because it's not just that Esther says, well, why would it be for him? And Lady Denham just smiles and says, who else? And then just
yeah, I know, it's good.
And then they shoot back to Babington and Sidney, and Babington and Sidney continue to have a conversation about, because at first it was about, I think it was about Charlotte at first. And then it was about taming, right? It was about, he says, you want to tame her? And he says, no, Babington says, I think she's tamed me.
Right.
And then they shoot over to.
Wait a minute. Then Sidney says, I can just imagine that.
But I think that doesn't, I think the way that's cut, because this conversation is split. The way they spliced it together, it's split because there's dialogue with Babington and Sidney, and then they cut to Esther and Lady Denham where there's dialogue, and then they cut back to Babington and Sidney where there's dialogue, and then they cut back to Charlotte and Mary where there's dialogue. So I don't remember exactly where they splice it, but that conversation is split. And I think that's because you see what's happening with Babington's hopes, and then you go to Esther's hopes, and then you see what's happening with Sidney's hopes, and then you go into Charlotte's hopes, and that's where they talk about how do you know who is the one? And Mary says, you just know, I suppose.
Right.
And then the way that Sidney and Babington are talking about being tamed, they talk about it with absolute joy and ease.
Yes.
Like, this just makes sense to me. Like, this is the way it happens. And it's as if we need another reason to love the kind of men that they are. Right. That they're just like, no, this is a good thing. I love being tamed. You hear that's a phrase of, oh, you're whooped or you're whipped. And it's just, these men back in that time are like, no, this is excellent. I love being in their power. I love being tamed by these people.
Well, and look at the women they are choosing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then we see James Stringer go upstairs to talk to his father and try and convince him to stop.
Yep.
And tell him about the letter he had received. And you talk about that.
I think what's interesting there too is that, and this is again the first time that I kind of picked up on this particular aspect, but when old Stringer is talking about the work that's been done, and he's basically telling James, you should be proud of this. I think what he's saying there's it's not just that, look at how good your work is, you could be more. It's, you should be proud enough that this is one thing you've accomplished, and that should be enough for you. This is where you should stay. This is where you should live, because everything he sees how his son is dressed, and it's clearly kind of set him off a little bit. Like, you're just trying to change so much. Look at this work that you've done. This is who you are. This is where you need to stay. This is where you should be proud, because this is what actually means something.
Well, and don't you think old Stringer just doesn't want him to get above his station, as it were? And it gets the impression his ambition wants to move him above his station.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what he wants him to say. This is where your focus should be. This is where you need to stay. Not in those lofty dreams you have, not in any of that. Look at how you're dressed. And he says, this is about that Charlotte girl, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that James is actually, I feel like, yes, that set him off and that made him mad, but I think there's a multi-layered thing to that. I think he was upset that his dad was calling him out and basically saying, you're so easily led by some girl who's going to give you these delusions of grandeur, when instead of like possessing real talent that he can move up. I think that's how James saw it, is I actually have this talent and this ability, and I can make something of myself. And yet here you stand accusing me of being this dog easily led by its owner, by its keeper.
Yes, that's true. Yeah,
because there was real pain on his face when he was saying that.
And so then he leaves in anger. I mean, I'll never give a thought to this angry old man. So he leaves, and which we come to regret.
Yeah.
And then we see Arthur and Mary arrive at the ball. They're sort of in the background. We see them walk
Diana,
in.
Arthur and Diana, yeah.
I mean, Diana. I don't know why I want to say Mary.
Because
Diana.
you're getting to the point where Mary and Charlotte come in.
Yeah, that's it. And yes, and then Mary and Charlotte come in and they're greeted by Tom. And Tom says the same thing that Mary had just said about, Mary said that Charlotte would look ravishing. And Tom comes in and says, "Oh, both of them, you're so ravishing." It's just funny. And then he opens the ball.
Yep.
And I'm always
Sidney
watching.
makes a beeline.
Yeah, I'm always watching not Tom, Babington and Sidney in the background when that happens. And then Mrs. Griffin and her bouquet of blossoms arrive.
Mrs. Griffiths, yeah. I love her and Reverend Hankins' relationship.
Yeah, no, it's funny. But I don't think she's returning, that actress. I don't think
is he?
Yes.
Okay.
He is. He's going to be back.
I felt like I saw that, but then I didn't do anything for his post in our group, so I wasn't sure.
She's in that other series, The Nevers, I think is the name of it.
Oh yeah.
But it's great that he asks her to compliments her and asks her to dance.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the confrontation between Georgiana and Sidney.
Well, I think before that too, it's important to note that Tom is still using Sidney to promote his town, because as Sidney's making the beeline for Charlotte, he says, "Come, you have to meet this person who just rented this apartment," as if to say, hey, convince him to bring more people. So he's still using Sidney to work the room and still using Sidney's personality and connections to get.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It was right
done.
before that Tom waylays Sidney, who wants
the first stop.
Yeah. The first time.
So this talk between Georgiana and Sidney really bugs me.
Yeah.
You've done everything to ruin my happiness. What you mean by saving you from getting married against your will to some really old guy who was totally okay with you slitting your neck? Like, you mean that happiness?
Yeah. And I love the fact that Sidney says, "I don't understand your meaning."
Because she says, "What are your intentions with Charlotte?"
Right. Yeah. And so he said, "Nothing could be further from my mind." And it wasn't. Nothing was further from her mind. And fortunately, Arthur walks up right then.
He's so giddy. I'm so glad he's coming back. I really, really am.
And he asked her to trip the light fantastic.
She would be delighted, Arthur.
And do you know where that saying comes from?
No.
It's all about the dancers on the stage, that they had lights in front of them, and sometimes they would kick the lights, like candle light kind of light that was on at the front of the stage.
Okay.
And so trip the light, fantastic.
There's another one I was hoping the meaning to, and it comes later, but when he says, "As sure as eggs are eggs," when Tom says that at the end, why is that a saying? So that
not sure it is.
Those two were the two in the whole season, the whole series. I'm like, I don't know.
It might just be Tom saying.
That's true.
So Sidney sends her off to dance with Arthur.
And I think that's twofold too, because I think in this whole show, in this whole episode, everything is like double meaning. Maybe that's me reaching because I just want things to talk about. I don't know. It's very possible that's what this is. But when she's talking about rooting my happiness, and then Arthur comes up giddy wanting to dance with her, he says yes. I think Sidney's like, "Yes, please take her away from me because she's getting on my nerves and I don't want to be around this right now." But I think it's also, look at how happy Arthur is, and he makes you happy. Go be with him. I'm not trying to ruin your happiness. I'm trying to give you what's real happiness, and sends her out with him.
Yeah, that's right. And she has a wonderful smile on her face.
The instant she's on that floor with Arthur, her facial expression changes from anger at Sidney to pure joy at being able to dance with him.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Honestly, I would love to dance with Arthur if he danced like that.
Oh yeah.
That would be so fun.
He's a lot of fun.
Yes.
Okay, so now Sidney's trying to get to Charlotte now that he's seen her, and she's gotten through dancing with somebody else, and he gets waylaid again, this time by Mary.
And she says, she stops and like she whispers something to Mary or to Charlotte. And this is something I asked Kate Ashfield about. She's like, I honestly don't remember what I said. because it was 2 years ago. So I didn't get that. But I was thinking about that today as I watched it. She whispered something to Charlotte, and Charlotte smiled coyly. And then Mary's got a big smile, and she walks up to Sidney and she says, Sidney, I haven't seen you this happy in a long time. And he looks directly at Charlotte and he says, yes. But I wonder if what her, because I've been trying to figure out what reason would Mary have. And again, I understand this is a scripted show and that's what she was scripted to do. So that's what she did. But as a character, if you put yourself in the mindset of the character, what reason could she have had to do that? And I think it was telling Charlotte essentially, I'm going to figure out the lay of the land for you. And then I'll return with him and I'll let you know what I found out.
Well, I
But this is
think
I can come up with.
I think she probably would have whispered pretty much the same thing to Charlotte. I haven't seen Sidney this happy in a long time.
I don't think she said that, because then she goes to stop him when he's clearly on his way to Charlotte.
Yes.
And being an advocate for them being together, Mary wanted them together. Mary wanted them together. She encouraged it. I don't think she would have just randomly stopped him just to tell him the same thing she told Charlotte. I think that she was trying to, back then when they would try to figure out the lay of the land. I mean, girls still do that today. Let me figure out what this guy thinks about you and I'll come back and I'll let you know.
I don't know. I guess it's not real important what she
said. It is
said
to me. It is
important because they didn't tell us.
But it is important to me as a viewer. I want to know what was said. I want to, especially knowing the end, I want to know what reason she could have had to disrupt our happy ending.
Well, it may not even occur to her that somebody else like James would come in and dance with her, with Charlotte.
Oh, I'm sure it didn't. But I mean, for me as a writer, when I write things, even if it's not included in the script, I have a reason for why it's being done. I don't write scripts. I write fiction and nonfiction books. But when I'm writing this out, I have an absolute thought in my head of why I want a character to do something. It doesn't mean I'm going to write it in the dialogue, though. It doesn't mean I'm going to write it in the story itself. But as a writer, I need to know what is the motivation here. And so there is a motivation that they had for her to go stop him. There is a reason there. And I think for me, that's why it's important, because I want to know what the reason was. Maybe that's a question for the writers of this episode. Like, what, instead of the actors, like why did you have her go over there? There had to be something.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to be as easy as, well, we had to keep them apart. I think that they're too smart of writers for that. I think that they put more thought into the script than that, I think.
Well, anyway, whatever she says, we don't know. And so then
we can still talk about it.
I know, but I just assumed she was saying something like, I hope Sidney says something to you tonight, or, something like that. And so then James quickly steps in to ask Charlotte to dance.
And he was watching her as she was brought over there. He was waiting for his moment.
Yep. And he was probably just really thankful that Sidney got waylaid. And so then
she was fairly nervous.
Yeah. And then he takes the opportunity to tell her about the offer he's received for an apprenticeship in London, which is wonderful. And he knew she'd be glad for him.
Absolutely, he would, because she's a friend and she's a true friend. And by this time, he obviously realizes that that's what she views them as. But a true friend, you want to share these, like with Fred, you want to share these because Fred had the same reaction that Charlotte did. Right. How good it was. I think it's interesting to note that the moment they started dancing, Charlotte was very visible. I mean, she wasn't even trying to hide that she's looking elsewhere, that she wants to be elsewhere.
She was slow to come around because she was keeping her eyes on Sidney. Yeah.
And then Sidney also gives Mary, like, I never really noticed it before. When they cut away, Sidney kind of stops and stares at Mary to the side, like, really? And then he looks back. So Stringer is very much aware that not only is this girl, she doesn't feel about me the way I think I feel about her, but she clearly doesn't want to be out here with me right now. This is my shot. I'm going to tell her everything I want to tell her.
Yeah, and I probably won't have another opportunity.
Yeah.
No. So then they cut away, as you were talking about the film editing. Then they cut away to old Stringer upstairs. He finally comes down the ladder and then grabs his chest and falls over and obviously knocks the candles over.
Yeah. And again, that's again mixed with hope and heartache, because the whole conversation of, I got this apprenticeship, I'm going to go to London, I'm going to do this. Oh, you're going to stay here. It's all cut with scenes of him slowly dying.
Yes. And at the end of dancing with Stringer, he says he sees Sydney, and obviously what you were saying, it's obvious that she's keeping her eye on Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Stringer tells her that I hope he's worthy of you.
Yeah.
And also she talks about the fact that she's found a reason to stay in Sanditon.
Yeah.
She
As
thinks.
she stares at Sydney.
Right. And more than that, I mean, the look on Theo James' face as he can't take his eyes off of Sydney, off of Charlotte,
Yeah.
is that's really something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not till now that Lady D and Esther arrive.
Yeah.
And are greeted by Tom.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they were fashionably late, huh?
Yeah. And right before that is when Babington tells him, well, what are you waiting for? You've been watching her all night. I hope you get a favorable response, my friend. And Theo James or Sydney says nothing this whole thing. He just nods and he smiles and he smirks just while Babington does all the talking. And then Babington says, and me as well. Or I wish myself a favorable response as well, whatever. And Sydney pats him back and Babington makes his move.
Right. And he goes and asks Esther to dance. Obviously.
And while he's making his way over there, we see Diana on the sidelines looking very agitatedly towards Georgiana and Arthur. She's so jealous of what they have.
Yes, what she thinks they have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they do have something that Arthur and her don't, though, because Arthur and Diana don't have that sort of levity, that sort of joy, that sort of freedom. She does think it's romantic. But part of it is because he's giving Georgiana a side that is not reserved for Diana.
And he's moving, which she has said she didn't want to see him move anymore, basically. And so Arthur they're really enthusiastically dancing, and Arthur gets going too fast and loses his balance and basically falls down, seats himself basically to get his balance right there where Diana is, ready to say, we need to leave.
Yeah. And Georgiana just kisses him on the hand and is, okay, I'm gonna go then.
And Diana chastises Georgiana, which is actually a good sign because, it means that she's treating her like an equal.
Yeah. And I think too, she really doesn't want Arthur to leave her. So it's because obviously Georgiana and Arthur weren't doing anything wrong, but I think it was more than just medical fear. I think it was also jealousy that was like, hey, how dare you? How irresponsible of you?
Well, and that's what comes out in the next conversation. But have you noticed how I love the way Georgiana grabs a man that's standing there and gets him to go dance with her?
Just a random dude.
Just a random dancer, but she's not shy, as opposed to what her attitude was at the first ball. Obviously she's become more comfortable.
And I think it's interesting that they place her with Arthur and then she goes off and comfortably goes with someone else. I think Arthur is bringing out the side of, hey, people are generally good. Yeah. They're not all bad. And so I think that
not everybody's gossiping about you all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And I like that during this, there's two things that happen kind of in the same sort of area. And one is you can hear Leo Suter go, woo, while he's dancing. And every time I hear him, he was actually asked about that on Instagram Live. He's like, yeah, I was just excited in the moment. But every time I hear that, it makes me laugh because he's just so excited. He's so happy to be dancing with Charlotte. He's so happy to be in that room. He's so happy to be a part of this. And he just lets out one big whoop. And then also right after that.
As you're talking about that, I'm just thinking about the fact that obviously Leo Sutter and Rose Williams developed a pretty good friendship. And I'm sure that if Leo hadn't been committed to the other show, then he might have returned as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And
again, it's 2 years where they finished filming.
Exactly. This. And yet people aren't so up in arms about that.
Yeah.
So
no one really wanted her to be with him.
Huh?
No one really wanted Stringer to end up with Charlotte except for a very, very select few.
Well, that's true. But nonetheless, it's sort of like he's not coming back either in whatever capacity, even if it has nothing to do with Charlotte.
Yeah. And I think honestly, the biggest reason that people threw as big of a fit about Theo is because we're robbed of a happily ever after between what we were expecting was a happily ever after. I mean, you see these people saying we were lied to. Well, no, they told you what they hoped for. Andrew Davies in the interview he didn't tell you, yes, he's saying they said, well, will they have a happily ever after? And he said, well, if we ever get to do one, yes, that's what we'd like to see. But he didn't say, I'm signing this contract saying this is what will happen. He never said that.
Yeah, people weren't under, once ITV canceled it, there was no contract.
Exactly.
And that's why these people were free to do whatever they wanted to do. And whatever they got asked to do a lot earlier.
Yeah. And they tried to get everybody back, but you can't, people have lives. And there was a long time in between the filming. Even there was a long time, not just between filming, but there was a long time in between cancellation and restarting. There was a long time between those two. So people had to move on. They have to make a living. So I don't think all the bad blood there is just insane. But during this time, we watch Sidney walk away, and he makes sure to make eye contact with Charlotte before he starts walking. So Charlotte watches him the whole way. So at the end of the dance, she knows exactly where he is, and she goes right to him in the balcony.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I love how he says it to her when he says, I've never wanted to put myself in the power of someone else before. I've never wanted to care for someone other than myself. And he's saying, I've never wanted to give myself fully over to you. I've never wanted to be controlled by someone else or captive by someone else. And I want to care for you. And it's interesting because that in the real living relationship, you're both captive to each other, sort of. So you know that you can trust what's there. You know that you can trust the other person that you love and are giving yourself to, because they're not going to ruin it. They're not going to destroy it. Or you, rather.
Right. But even before he says that, which is amazing, I'm just so glad that he's like, do you remember our first conversation in this balcony? Which we all remember, and then it just really is confessing how awful he was to her.
Yeah.
And, she really lets him off the hook about that.
I don't think so. I think she was dead on. I think Charlotte's usually dead on, where she says, you're not a different man, because he's not. He's just improved in his manners.
But right before that, she says, I deserved it.
Word.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
But I think it's because she kind of did. I mean, she was talking to a complete stranger about his family in that way. She was dead on. She was absolutely right.
But he asked, I mean, come on.
I agree. He shouldn't have said that. But I think that's where she was coming from is, well, I probably shouldn't have said the things I said. I probably shouldn't have been so open with a stranger. So I think she was too self-deprecating for sure, because she didn't deserve to be spoken to like that. But she also should have used a little more care.
She forgave him,
Oh yeah,
for it.
Because I think she understood too why he was the way he was. I think that was part of their really deep conversations and deep connection, really. She understood why he acted that way. She understood why he was so closed off and why he was so much of an outlier.
Much more so than most people.
Yeah.
Okay, so he is about to talk about a proposal when suddenly Sir Edward interrupts things. And of course, Sidney, being the responsible person and brother he is, he goes downstairs to try and handle the situation, help handle it. And somebody just recently I was hearing that was just going on and on about, it's Edward's fault they're not together. It's Edward's fault. Well, the whole situation, of course. But, if he hadn't interrupted, and this is true, but
you would have asked, yeah. But if Tom also wouldn't have made Sidney such a figurehead in that town for handling all of Tom's issues and helping him out through these things, that's the possibility he may not have stepped down the way he did, or at least gone back to her right away, or maybe not stayed with him and to make sure he got on the boat.
Yeah. Well,
there's
anyway,
a lot of factors.
Got on the boat. You mean got on the carriage?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay, yeah. So Lady D asks, after some dialogue, Lady D asks Sidney, and of course Babington helps, to take Sir Edward and put him on the London coach. And the look, this is where you were talking about the look on Lady D's face at that point.
It's actually the whole scene, because when Edward comes in and he approaches Esther, Lady D stands up and she's kind of looking at it confused for a minute, but she's really slowly making her way through the crowd over there. And like, you can almost see the understanding dawn on her as he's talking, as he's saying these things, that she's finally made the full real connection. She's finally figured out the entire puzzle. And when she looks at Esther, it's not a condemnation, but it's almost like a sense of knowing. because she doesn't condemn her. She even says to the lady or Mrs. Griffiths, I don't judge her at all.
Right. She sees that she really is the victim.
Yeah. And I think it was a complete and total understanding of how deeply rooted the abuse was that she endured for all those years. And I think she starts to figure it out the moment Edward comes in, but it's the way she moves and the expression on her face as she's going through the crowds that makes me kind of see that, holy cow, I get it now. I see exactly what it was. But the look of knowing that she had on her face when Esther was there, again, I kind of want to hear more about this backstory of her saying it's much better to be loved than to love. Obviously, she gave us that story with the one guy, but I wonder if there's like another instance where she did experience that kind of abuse. And maybe it was from that guy where she said he kept me dangling like a dog. So maybe there was some of that abuse that she felt knowing and what Esther was experiencing there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure she'd witnessed a lot over the years.
Yeah. And I wrote down be my hero. The moment Edward comes in there, he's like, you need to leave. And he starts pushing him back and pulling him back. And it was, I just love how he just stepped up and took it out, and he and Babington took him out of the room.
Those are our two heroes for sure. Mm-hmm. And then they cut to Diana and Arthur, who are walking through the city on their way home, discussing her concern about him marrying Georgiana, and he just laughs. It's so funny.
How great is his laugh? It's so fun to listen to.
It is. And he's like, you have nothing to worry on that account. A lifelong bachelor, it's, and that makes
sound a little sad.
Diana very happy though. She's not going to be left on her own.
And it's kind of a sad parallel there because she seemed happy, but Arthur did not. As he talked about how lifelong bachelor, I don't understand women or how they work. He sounded, I don't know if sad is the right word. He just sounded very melancholy about it.
Resigned.
Yeah. But he did seem a little melancholy about it though, that he just was like, yeah, this is what I have. And yeah, he was resigned to it, but there was also a little level of sadness there. And Diana was just like, oh, yay. Okay, good. We're okay.
And then she noticed the flames upstairs where we all know.
Yeah.
Old Stringer was.
You really see the kind of people the Parkers are when they have turmoil like this. Because Diana immediately went to run to tell Tom. Arthur immediately started banging on doors. And we see when they all run down there that Arthur has his jacket off and he's been throwing water on the fire himself. Yeah. Sidney gets right into the front of the line, bringing in the hose, getting the hose out there. And Tom just kind of stands in the background, staring at his life's work being burned up. But he doesn't help.
We're skipping a scene.
I know, but I just wanted to point out that it's in these moments that you see what the Parkers are made of. Because it's easy to just take Arthur and say, oh, he's silly. Diana, oh, she's a hemophiliac. And
when push comes to shove, they're right there. Yeah. And we see that in their response to the fire.
Yeah.
And so
I'm not going to forget my favorite scene. You crazy?
Well, and what I really notice is once again, it's Charlotte who's consoling Esther.
Yeah.
It's Charlotte who consoles people through the whole series.
Because she can read people and she can really understand that. It was the same thing that's the interesting parallel episode. When Georgiana, Charlotte had the same look on her face as she watched Georgiana in that room for the very first time that she did when she was leaving Esther after consoling her.
Yeah. Yeah. And then of course Babington comes in, tells Charlotte that Sidney asked him to tell her that he was staying there to take care of Edward. And then he goes in to talk to Esther. And this is such a great conversation. I know you want to talk about it.
Yes, I do.
And talk about the acting and the interaction.
Just watching it again, I was crying today watching it because it's just the emotion that Mark Stanley and Charlotte Spencer had brought to this table elevated this scene so much. And I'm gonna miss Mark Stanley. Yes, man. I'm so sad. I still hold the hope he's gonna make a small appearance in season 3. Something. I hope just for a glimpse. I know that he's done. I'm pretty sure he's done with playing Henry in that other series that was being filmed at the same time. Yeah. So in here, this whole conversation, I first want to talk about how Esther's face, you can tell she's never been, we know kind of from the history of Edward that she's never been spoken to this way or treated this way or even in any way remotely being treated like she deserves to have love like a human being. Edward has never made her feel that way. So you watch her face change from there's just this like almost defiance at first, and then trying to control the situation, to shock, to wow, I'm actually worth this. I'm actually worth someone saying this. And it was sweet that Babington is the one who made that come out in her.
And I love the fact that she asked these questions. So, straight in such not confrontational way, but just so honestly, what her concerns are.
Yeah.
Why would you have me for a wife if you don't want to own me?
Well, I'm going to go through what I remember the dialogue. I might paraphrase a little bit. Well, when Esther says, are you not disgusted? Are you worried you're going to be tainted by my disgrace? And immediately, without even hesitating, Babington says, I don't give a damn what people think. I don't care what they say. And then she goes on to say essentially that, he says, don't you know that can't you see that I'm in love with you? And she says, what is that to me? Because I don't love you.
Right.
And his response here is so worthy of like a standing ovation.
Yes.
I don't care. It's enough that you like me. It's enough that you trust me and are going to let me care for you. That's all I care for. And she says, what does she say? You have the dialogue pulled up right there.
I do.
I knew you would.
Well, so she says, I don't give a damn what anyone else thinks, what you said. And my dear girl, don't you know that I'm in love with you? And what is that to me?
Because I do not love you.
Yeah. Since I do not love you, I don't care. It's enough that you like me and that you trust me. I don't wish to be your property. Good, because I do not wish to own you. Why else would you have me as your wife? Because I want to make you happy. I could never try to lead or constrain you, Esther. All I ask is to walk through life by your side. And then she says, very well then. And then his acting when he says, you accept me.
Yeah. And his whole face and body just kind of took a step back from it, like, wait, what?
She just changed her mind. And she says, stop talking before I change my mind. And kisses him.
Even how they do that scene, the kiss is so sweet because it's a quick little kiss, but then she almost bears more of herself by doing the little nudge thing with her nose to his nose at the end. She's almost like bearing more of herself by doing that than she did by kissing him. She's saying, okay, I'm gonna be silly and playful with you. I'm gonna be no holds barred, all walls down with you now. And I'm so glad that we get that ending. That's just like the most perfect ending you could ask for a relationship.
Well, yes, we get to see them married and
well, that's what I'm saying.
Yes,
but to have two characters come to that realization, and for Babington, not only, again, what a guy that he is not afraid to say these things that make him vulnerable, these things that say, I know you don't love me and I'm totally fine that I love you more. That's great. Let me love you. Let me do this for you because I know I can make you happy.
Right.
I love him.
It's a great scheme. So now we're back at the fire. And not only, see, one of the reasons it's so heartbreaking, but the whole situation is because Charlotte is like the Parkers. She's a doer.
Yep.
And she's the one who organizes the water bucket line while Sidney is using the hose. And so, they really belong together. Yeah.
And it's almost like because when he was rolling in the cart with the hose on it, he and her had a moment where he just kind of watched her and stared at her for a few minutes. And then he looked ahead and kept going. And then she was like, okay, form a line. So that's how well they even work together, that they don't need words. They don't need to.
Well, as a matter of fact, in the book, they have Sidney say, listen to her.
Oh, really?
To all the people that are there.
Oh, I kind of wish they left that in.
Well, they're not really doing the dialogue, are they? They're just in that scene. They have the music playing. They you aren't really hearing the words.
Yeah, I only know what they say because I have children, so everything I listen to has subtitles. That's all I know. She's yelling, form a line.
Right, but you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah. So it wouldn't really matter. But I think it would be, for me, I would still like to hear him yell, listen to her. I would love that.
Yeah.
Man, every time I talk to you, I feel like a greater, like, urgent need to read the book. And then I leave the conversation and I don't get to read it. I'm gonna start it tonight, Janice. I'm gonna do it tonight.
Okay.
You better like keep on me about it. Like, hey, where you at?
Okay. What chapter you on?
Maybe that'll have to be like one of our episodes. We just talk about the book. Then I won't have an
Yeah.
excuse to not read it. I'll have to read it for that. So the fire rages all night and everything's
Oh, and
gone.
I did see, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No, that's right.
I did see a post about the author who wrote that
Oh,
being back in
good.
and so I assume she's doing
Two
the
and three.
next book, the next.
Yes,
series.
good. I'll get
So.
those. If I don't catch it and you do, you gotta let me know so we can like promote it.
Sure.
And so I can buy it. So I want it. So the fire rages all night and everything's gone. It's just demolished. And again, this is a tribute to how they cut the film together, how they splice it together of them, the Parkers going to the wreck, touring it. And then we know that Charlotte at the very same time is going to see James Stringer, where his dad is in the coffin in the middle of his living room.
Right.
And this is another just kudos to Leo, because even talking about the scene makes me really emotional.
Yeah.
How deeply pained he is. And it's a tribute to how good he is that he can keep that weird accent while still getting that emotional and crying about it. And that's not a dig on his accent. I know that people tease him a lot about it, like, what accent are you doing there? I've done Instagram Live, people were giving him a hard time about that, but that he could keep all that up while still emoting that much and crying at the same time is a really, really a job well done. And the way he says Charlotte there, when he says, we parted on a quarrel, Charlotte, there is so much pain in how he says her name that he knows he's already lost Charlotte, or he thinks he has, and he's clearly lost his dad, and he's just at his most rock bottom he could possibly be, that the way he says her name, it's really painful to hear.
Right. And then you said that already about the Parkers and Diana, but one of the reviews I read of this show was talking about this episode was talking about the way that Theo James says $80,000.
Yeah.
I mean, not dollars, but pounds.
Almost sound like a whisper.
80,000, like with so much pain,
Mhm.
you know. And so 80,000 pounds in 1819
I was gonna look that up. I'm so glad you did.
is worth about 1,280,000 pounds, or for us to understand it, 1,747,770,000 US dollars.
That's a lot of money.
You know, it's just under $2 million.
That's a lot of money.
And yeah, I mean, by modern standards, that it would probably be even more than that it would cost to build that.
Yeah.
But to have it all burn up,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's not a small fortune. It's a fortune.
And I love how, and again, this is just more example of how the Parkers band together and are stronger in the midst of these turmoil situations, because Arthur's like, I haven't touched my inheritance. I don't have a wife. It's all yours. And they're all so willing to just hand these things over. No, we're going to do this. And that's when Tom says it. I love you for thinking that. I love you for doing that, but it's not even a drop in the bucket compared to what I owe.
Right.
And Diana here really shows what her role is in that family as the mother figure. No, we're the Parkers. We will not let this stand. We are not going to flounder and fall. We're going to rise up, and somehow we're going to find the solution to this, and we're going to fix this, because this is what we do and this is who we are. And for that to come from her after the whole episode, seeing her be such a hypochondriac, it's really fun to see that these characters, they're so well written that they're worth watching, they're worth joining, because you can see that they are not just one-dimensional characters. They're multi-layered, multi-leveled, and they're incredibly loyal, and there are people who really understand what love actually is. And I think that this scene really demonstrates that all four of these siblings truly understand what it is to love another person.
And to support your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then we see them all talking with Lady D.
I love that the next shot after this, though, is just like a close-up of her face, yelling and pointing her finger at Tom.
Yeah, she's known this was going to come at some point.
Yeah.
The whole time, you know. And now it finally has, and she is laying into Tom. And of course, it's Charlotte and then Sidney that come to the rescue, as
Yep.
it were, to try and actually find a solution.
Yeah, I think that once, and this is the other reason I think that Arthur and Sidney and Diana stepped up the way they did is because when one Parker falls and gets down, it's the other ones who kind of come in and pull him up. Because even when Lady D is haranguing him, Tom's just standing there taking it. Because from the moment that place burned down, you can see it later on towards the end when he's in that church. He's like, no, I'm the worst kind of human being. I deserve everything I get. I've screwed everyone over. I deserve nothing good anymore. And that's where he's receiving all this from Lady Denham. Like, yep, you're right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So it's Charlotte is now essentially a Parker and is filling in that role that Arthur and Diana and Sidney have of, no, I'm going to lift you up. You're not going to fall because you are a Parker. And this is what family does for family. And so Charlotte's just putting herself right in there as family.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we see Sidney and Charlotte walking out to the coach. And of course, our favorite thing is the scene they cut out.
I'm glad they didn't leave. I'm glad we got to see that, but I'm also glad they didn't leave it in.
No, it was appropriate that they didn't include it, but that kiss in the street. And then the way Charlotte follows the coach as it takes off.
And honestly, it's this scene more than any other scene for me that makes me mad they don't get their happily ever after. It's this scene right here. It's not even so much the final scene. It's not the balcony scene. It's this one right here where they're both filled with so much, like there's this air over them of, okay, this is insurmountable thing. This is a really big thing. There's a heaviness to them, but there's still that hope of him saying, and when I return, we're going to finally finish that conversation we had. So they both know, okay, this is it. We're going to be together. We're going to be each other's person. And there's this, her saying, I know you're going to do this. I know you're going to do it well. So both of them are filled with such devotion, understanding each other, but also because they're cut from the same cloth and she's essentially now a Parker, that they both know they're going to do whatever it takes to save the people they love. So it's this scene right here that every time I watch it, I get mad that there's not a happily ever after for them.
Right.
Because this is the scene that truly demonstrates that if anyone other than Esther and Babington deserve a happy ending in the show, it's those two, because of how deeply committed they are to the people that they love and what they will do out of love for someone else. They will sacrifice everything they have for someone else. And you can see that really clear in this scene.
Yes, I agree totally. And then we see the graveside service for old Stringer, and while Sydney's in London.
Yep.
And you already talked about the scene with Tom and Mary, where
and Mary refuses to let him stay there. She does not lose hope in him at all.
Right. Which is wonderful that she's so encouraging to him.
She has not given up on him, and she won't, because again, she's a Parker.
And then we see Charlotte and writing a letter to her sister and describing the mood as they show us the mood among the Parkers. And don't you love the way that the daughter is the one who announce,
he's here.
Yeah, because they've been looking out the window. Anyway.
And I think too that it's interesting that all the Parkers are together in the same room, waiting and just kind of suffering together. They aren't all in their separate rooms. It's Diana's in there at the table playing cards. Arthur's on the couch watching them. Tom is pacing. Mary's sitting at a table, and the kids are next to them. They're all in the same room going through this together as Charlotte is upstairs talking about the hopes of Sidney coming back.
And it speaks volumes that Tom doesn't go to London with Sidney. I mean, it's in keeping with what's happened all along, but it does speak volumes. And so everybody's rejoicing, and Charlotte comes downstairs to see what's going on and what the rejoicing is. And everybody else leaves the room, and Sidney gets to break the news to Charlotte.
And I think it's no surprise to anyone that my favorite part about the scene is watching all the facial expressions of people as they rejoice with Sidney. And Sidney is clearly putting on a front of barely there smiles and just reacting to what's around him, but clearly being filled with a brokenness and devastation that no one stops to look at.
And again, the contrast in the hope they all feel and the heartbreak he feels, and that he has to share with Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
She's the only one who says, "What's the matter?" The moment
Right.
she looks at him, her entire face falls and she knows.
That something's wrong. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so obviously it's devastating news to know that he was obliged to make an offer of marriage to Mrs. Campion instead of being able to make a proposal of marriage to Charlotte.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting there is when he walks up to her, and they've held hands before. He's grabbed her hands on the cliff. He's grabbed her hands on the balcony. He's, they've kissed each other before. So it's physical touch is not something that's so foreign that one would jump back. When he grabs her hand, it startles her. In that moment, he reaches out and he says, "My dear Charlotte." He grabs her hand. She almost like jumps backwards. She does do it a little bit. She stares down on his hands and her eyes get a little wider. She looks back up to him and then they start filling with tears. It's almost like from the moment he touches her, her eyes start to fill with tears. And it feels like the hand grab is desperate instead of really loving, because I think he's desperate for that. As on the hill, when he wanted to touch her, he wanted to put his arm around her, touch her in the smaller back, whatever, in that cliff walk. Now he's grabbing her hand in desperation to have whatever part of her he can for as long as he possibly can. And I think that's almost more heartbreaking, is his desperate desire for that kind of connection with her. And it startled Charlotte because it's so desperate, because though it should be natural, the tone of his face and how he's looking and the appearance of his body language, it felt desperate when he reached and grabbed her hand.
Well, I think, and also she's like so fearful about what it is that's upset him so much.
I think it's because she knows that the only thing that could upset him that much is to not have her, because that's what would upset her that much, is to not have him.
In one of the interviews I heard with Rose, she talked about the fact, two things. One, that when she got the news about where the story was going, she really cried about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that.
And two, that she just got worn out from doing, because of course they shot that scene several times.
Yeah.
And the scene where she goes up and cries, how just physically exhausting that was.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. I mean, because there's it almost jumps out at the screen to you.
Yeah.
Of what she's feeling and how deeply she's feeling it. I do wish, and I know that this would have dug the knife a little deeper, but I think the only reason I wish this is because I know Theo's not coming back. I wish that he would have told her a little bit more about how he felt about her before he told her what was going on. Just because I know that we'll never get another opportunity to have that.
And then we see the Babington wedding.
Right from that heartbreak to hope in the wedding.
And I know. And I think I felt the same thing too, but it was interesting watching it through my cousin's eyes again, because she's like, "Oh, this isn't the wedding with Eliza." I'm like,
no, thank God. Well, so glad they didn't do that.
No. And so I described the wedding as rose petals and kisses, the scene they show us. And then Lady D, of course, asks Charlotte, who looks pretty.
Wait. What? In the church, first of all, Babington and Esther's expressions are adorable.
Oh yeah,
I love them. But Lady D is like, "I loaned her that tiara,
Yeah,
she's funny line. And then she says, "I
expect to get it back," or something.
I hope they know I get it back. But it's so ridiculous that even Arthur and Diana are struggling to keep straight faces, because the whole context and the timing of what she's saying is so ludicrous that even the silly ones, the ones who are denoted as silly, cannot keep it together.
Yeah. Okay, so then Lady D waylays Charlotte. Gets Charlotte to talk to her by saying, "Are you still declaring your independence?" And Charlotte doesn't really say anything to Lady D. She just stops and looks at her. And then, of course, Lady D addresses Sidney too. So then after Sidney comes towards them, but then Lady D leaves because somebody has called her. And the look between the two of them when he's speaking to Charlotte is just another kind of devastation.
Yeah. And you could tell that, again, this is another where they drew the parallel between the cliff and what it is now, because he says, "And how is your family?" And it's the same thing he asked her on the cliff when he tried to make small talk. And it just, everything about this conversation feels so wrong, because they're so much more connected than that.
Right. And then of course Eliza's not gonna let Sydney out of her sight
Oh, I think she would. I just don't think she would if it involves Charlotte.
well, anyway, in this situation, and he's gone to pick up drinks for them, and she comes over and very quickly takes the drink. And the whole conversation about their wedding is really hard too.
And even when Charlotte begins asking Theo or Sidney about it on his own, she says, "How are your own wedding plans?" And all he says is elaborate.
Yeah.
And he doesn't look angry until Eliza walks up there. He looks devastated. And then Eliza walks up there and then he just looks angry. And the whole purpose of her coming up there is just to say, I own you. You belong to me and I am your master. And that's, I think, because I've heard a lot of people ask me, like, why do you hate on her so much? And other people I've heard say, she's not really that bad. She just loves him. No, she's almost extorting him at this point. Because her whole purpose there was not to show, it was to show Charlotte, but it was also to remind Sidney, I own you. I'm your master and you belong to me and you will do what I say, which is, and I love that Sidney, the only defiance he can bring is complete silence.
Right.
Because every question she asked him, and Sidney or Theo James has that little jaw tick thing that he does to show his irritation. And he did that the whole scene. And then she says, we'll see you later. Come on, Sidney. And then he has to leave because she owns him now.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy.
That, by the way, people, is why she is the bad guy here. It's not, she doesn't love him. It's not what it is.
And it's ironic since they're actually
no, that's a testament to how good they are at their jobs.
I know they just did an amazing job of portraying these people.
He was asked about that and he said, well, the key is to remember that we're actors and this is a job, not real life.
Exactly.
Excellent advice.
A really good point. And then it's great. We see the Babingtons in their wedding bed the next morning. And it's just so loving. You love their relationship.
Yes. And Babington, she said, I forgot where I was for a minute. He said, hope he wasn't unhappy. And she just kisses him. Like they're pure bliss.
Yeah. In contrast to what we have just seen.
Such relief.
And then we see Arthur and Diana leaving to return to London.
My glands have been requiring some stimulation.
Yeah. And they're talking about the doctor that's just set up in Harvey Street, I think it was. And then Charlotte goes and visits James to say goodbye.
Yep.
And again, he says to her, I understand that Mr. Sidney Parker is engaged. And then he says, well, she's not half the woman you are. And if he cannot see that, he does not deserve you.
And I think her face, because she stops for a minute, I think she's just kind of really appreciative of how James thinks about her and how he feels about her. Yes. But I think the other thing is too, is that Charlotte is very, very much aware that Sidney is aware of her worth and her value.
Oh yeah.
She is very much aware that Sidney loves her and not this other woman. And she's also very much aware that Sidney does not want to be with this other woman. So for him to say that, it's kind of like, well, you're right. If he can't see that, he doesn't deserve me, but he does deserve me because he can see it.
Right.
Just double devastation.
And then we're back on the cliff tops, which is where they met.
After she says goodbye to all the Parkers, and Tom says, "Here's eggs."
Oh, right. Yeah, I left that out.
Mary cries and says, "You're welcome anytime," which is just a setup and a welcoming to season 2 and all the kids. So that was kind of when I first saw this, that was where I thought it was going to be, because she tells the kids, "You make sure to write to me." Yeah. And so in my head, that's how they were going to go into the next season, was through letters and asking her to come back to help us through the letters.
Right. Right. It's a bittersweet scene.
Yeah. So the carriage on the hill stops.
Right.
She knows something's up.
Yeah. And you have this look on her face as there's the smallest glimmer of hope. And then he walks up and, says the very thing that she had said to him in episode 2, which is, tell me you don't think too badly of me.
I couldn't leave without, and then he says, tell me you don't think too badly of me. The other thing of note too is that when he first walks up there, he moves to her like he's going to kiss her, because again, it's he's so desperate and desiring for that connection with her.
Right.
Only now he has to restrain himself because he no longer gets that.
Right. And the look when she gets in the carriage, of course, he says, I don't love her, you know. And she's like, no, you can't speak it that way, you know. And he says,
Charlotte's so good.
Yeah. And he says, I'll keep up my side of the bargain. And then we see that scene with her getting in the carriage, weeping, and Sidney and his horse watching the carriage pull away. And somebody
even before that, though, you say what you're going to say, but there's something we got to say before that. Somebody wrote
what? Somebody wrote that even his horse looked like he was in pain.
It absolutely did. But when he first put her in the carriage, he left his hand on there and he just stared at her like he was soaking her in for a few minutes while it's almost like torture, because, you know, like, you want to get this last vision. If you know you're never going to see someone again and you have feelings for them, whatever, you want to remember them in a certain way. And you just kind of like take a photographic evidence of their face. And what he gets for his photographic evidence is her absolute heartbreak and crying, but he still stands there and kind of punishes himself a little longer and just continues to stare at her right outside the carriage.
Right.
And then continues to watch the carriage until it's gone. And again, this music that's playing in the background, you're almost like, okay, a fight's coming. This isn't the end. This can't be. No way. Because the music is so well done. And it was designed to be that way. That was the hope. But heartbreak.
Right. But thankfully, we got 2 more episodes.
We did. And that's
2 more seasons.
And that's the other thing, is that people are like, well, we don't get what we wanted. No, we did, because what we wanted was at season 2. We didn't have stipulations of only if. What we wanted was more, and we got more.
That's right. Yeah. And would people have campaigned so hard if not for that heartbreak?
No. I mean, it's a good show, but I think if that show ended with a happy ending, there wouldn't be a need for season 2 and 3.
And so, you notice that, like, they keep, kind of compared it to Downton Abbey. Well, Downton Abbey has all these things that cliffhangers,
Yeah.
That's what keeps you coming back, is cliffhangers. This was literally a cliffhanger.
It was, absolutely.
Anyway.
All right, so that finishes our episode 8. So I think that Janice and I are going to brainstorm. Probably going to do some parallel and ironies, an episode on that. Let us know what you want to see next, because now that we're doing recaps, it's kind of your choice. So we'll continue to come up with things to do, but we'd like to hear what you want. So reach out to me at the.sanditonchronicles@gmail.com. Let me know what you'd like to see. Or you can join our Facebook group, which is the Sanditon Chronicles Sanditon Family Fan Club. Let us know there. I'll probably put a poll on there soon, or some post up to ask for your feedback. You can also catch us on Instagram and Twitter under the Sanditon Chronicles. Just search for that. Different handles. But I want to hear from you. We want to know what you want to hear, what you want to see. Hopefully interviews are coming up soon. I'd really like to get those going. I'd like to have some of those for you.
Did you see on the Sisterhood's post, the Sanditon Sisterhood's post, about that they were taking questions yesterday and today, part of the day, this morning, about questions for Brenda Campbell. Is it Belinda Campbell?
Belinda, I think.
Belinda Campbell and Justin Young are going to do a Sunday Q&A. Awesome. They don't know which Sunday yet. So there's lots of, you can see the questions that people have asked, some of them.
Awesome. Yeah, we had a post in our group on Facebook about that. So I haven't
seen that yet, but anyway.
So make sure you check out the Sanditon Sisterhoods on Twitter. They are bringing back their Sunday Q&As. So I know that they just did one as a team, right? Last Sunday. They did the Sisterhood Q&A. So even if you didn't, that's over, you can't participate anymore from last week, still go back, look at the questions that they're asked and how they answered them. Check that out. It's always really good stuff on there.
Yes.
So that's it. Don't forget to subscribe and to share this page. The more you do that, the more followers we get, the more people we get to watch, the better content I can give you. So make sure you're doing that. Let people know about this, and we'll see you in a week where we are going back to another character spotlight. I just don't know on who yet because I forgot. That's what it is. So we'll see you in a week. Bye, guys.
Bye.